The New Testament speaks of the term agape being of the fatherly love of God for humans, as well as the human reciprocal love for God. The term extends to the love of one's fellow humans, as the reciprocal love between God and humans is made manifest in one's unselfish love of others. This is also considered the concept of charity. It is ironic then, yet fundamentally and stereotypically textbook, that this organization, under the guise of charity, would turn out to be nothing more than a cult that would destroy lives and tear apart families. A dangerous and destructive sect whose sole purpose was to seduce those who are desperate and disillusioned, simply for the selfish want and greed of a so-called man of God, Rocco Leo. In this next chapter, we further uncover the depths of this greed and the lengths that this man of God would go to avoid retribution in this, the next episode of the Agape Ministries, here on Just Lawful.
Adelaide is the perfect place to set a horror story. You know why all those films and books are always set in sleepy conservative towns? Because sleepy conservative towns are where those things happen. Exorcism, omens, shining, poltergeists. Adelaide is Amityville or Salem, and things here go bump in the night.
Welcome again to Just Lawful, where of course things do indeed go bump in the night. My name is Daniel Pinozzo, and I'm once again joined by my co-host, Sean Fewster.
Thanks, Daniel. Welcome, listeners, to another episode.
Absolutely, another episode. A huge thank you to everyone listening. A huge thank you to everyone who took part in coming on board this new case that we studied, the Agape Ministries International last week. Unbelievable. If you haven't heard the previous episode or our previous working for that, we strongly recommend you go back and listen to the podcasts on either Spotify and iTunes. I'll get that out right. And just catch up to where we are with Agape and all of our work previous to that. Sean, when we left off, we had just found out that the Agape Ministries International had finally got to court. There were people chasing them for money. A couple of people who owed big dollars, who had given under some desperate circumstances, some who had been sucked in as a partner of Rocco Leo. And of course, our third player was the ATO, Australian Taxation Office, not a small party.
And of course, when you've got people coming at you, when you've got the wolves at the door, there's only one thing to do, and that's go on a charm offensive.
Okay.
You familiar with the term charm offensive, Daniel?
I'm not. I'm getting an idea of what it might be.
Might be a journalistic term then. It's something where you try to turn the tables. It's not quite spin.
Right.
It's making sure people see the good in you.
Oh, I've heard that term as a fluff piece.
A fluff piece is another way of putting it.
There you go.
So Rocco Leo, wherever he was, because you'll remember he's missing at this point.
In the wind, I believe.
In the wind. Went on the charm offensive.
Okay.
And he did this first of all by hiring a very prominent Adelaide barrister.
Okay.
Friend of the show, Craig Caldecott.
Yes, okay.
Who's going to be very upset that I'm reminding him that he was part of all of this.
Okay.
But Craig Caldecott was hired by Agape Ministries, and I think as far as he understood, he was being hired by Pastor Rock, Brother Rock himself, to massage the organization's credibility within the media and defend their people in court. I said to you all last episode that as a result of those raids in March 2010, several members of Agape Ministries had gone to court for firearms offences.
That's right.
Craig was representing them all.
Okay.
And he was the first to tell you on the doorsteps of court, full US lawyer style, this is hype. This is hyperbole. This is a media beat up. These are ordinary citizens, ordinary people of God, ordinary, followers of the faith who are being unfairly slandered, besmirched by these accusations. He said multiple times, Agape is not a doomsday cult.
Okay.
This is not a doomsday cult. He said it to me in particular so many times that I said, well, Craig, put your money where your mouth is. Organise an interview for me.
Okay.
Actually give me someone to talk to. Let me speak to Brother Rock.
Sure.
There's nobody else between me and God except Brother Rock, so let me speak to Brother Rock.
And let's go right to the source and understand from that point of view where he comes from.
Now, I waited a little while. I said to Craig, here's some emailed questions. Email me back with the answers. Let's get a dialogue going. Well, unfortunately, the Messiah wasn't prepared to greet the supplicant at his door.
Okay.
I was denied, but I was given someone else to speak to.
Oh.
Craig gave me a call and said, come and meet me at this little cafe next door to the Adelaide Magistrates Court on King William Street in Adelaide, and I'll introduce you to Raphael and Patricia Azariah.
Okay, so these are new names so far?
Not new names. Cast your mind back to Leslie Barlygod.
Right.
Leslie Barlygod was one of the first people to raise the alarm about Agape Ministries, one of the people whose complaints to police led to that raid in the first place.
Sure.
Remember she said that she had lost contact with her son Raphael and her grandchildren?
Of course.
This is Raphael Azariah.
Okay.
Previously, Raphael Barlygod.
Right.
Raphael and Patricia changed their names.
Okay.
And in preparation for this interview, I thought, a good journalist should always just double check and see whether we've ever heard of these people before.
Okay. As you do.
February 12, 2000.
Uh-huh.
A full 10 years before the raid, there's a tiny, tiny article in the Advertiser's archives.
Yes.
A wedding notice marking the wedding of musician Raphael Azariah and his new wife, Patricia Lanzilli, as she was then.
Right.
Talking about their great love story, how they met, how it was ironic he'd been praying in the hope of finding a long-term partner and they hit it off immediately, very strong feelings between them. The pair were married on January 15, 2000 at Agape Ministries at Oakton. And they were married by Brother Rock. There was a photo in our archives of Brother Rock blessing the marriage of Raphael and Patricia.
So this is the first we've heard of Raphael and Patricia. Is this dating back the first we'd heard then of Brother Rock?
This is the very first mention of Agape anywhere in the Advertiser's archives.
Okay.
The very first time.
Right.
So you can trace the cult back to February of 2000.
Okay.
But here we are back in the then present day, June of 2010.
Sure.
We're 3 months on from the raids.
Yes.
I go to this cafe to meet up with these people. Done a lot of interviews in my time, but I've never done an interview before with two leather jacket wearing heavies watching everything that I do.
Hang on. So they have an entourage?
They have a two-man entourage. And look, I'm going to give you the description. Shaved heads, cauliflower ears, gold chains around their necks, rings on many fingers, big leather jackets.
Okay.
Heavies, toughs.
Sounds like.
I started thinking, of course, of the Enforcer.
Yes.
Remember the early complaints involved this mysterious man called the Enforcer who was apparently selecting his child brides?
Correct.
I'm thinking, is one of the two of you the Enforcer?
It would stand to reason, possibly.
So I asked. I got stony-faced silence, and Craig said, you're not here to talk to them, you're here to talk to the Azariahs.
Okay.
Also, so these two won't be talking to me at all. No, says Craig, they won't be talking to you at all, it's just the Azariahs.
Just let me ask you at that point, Sean. Had you done many interviews under said circumstances before?
This would be the absolute first.
Okay. What were you thinking going into, I guess going into that is one thing. Actually sitting down and then having some recognition of the circumstance you now find yourself in, what's going through your head?
At that point, I'm thinking, I'm really glad we're in a public place. The cafe is right on the street in King William Street.
Absolutely.
There's cars going past, there's people walking past. You're not far from the coroner's court. You're not actually far from the city watch house, so there's police officers wandering past.
Okay.
I'm very grateful for that at that moment.
Sure.
I'm glad I didn't decide to say, go to a cafe at Oakton or Mount Magnificent.
Yeah, or maybe have a closed circumstance in a... Yeah, okay, fine.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've sat down. Craig Calderhut's with us. We've got the Azariahs, two undisclosed gentlemen who are caring for them.
So the obvious question, I thought, is tell me about your faith. Tell me who and what you're all about. And Raphael told me, I am not a nutter or a crazy farm type of person. I am a person that believes in God. I am a Christian. I am a man who takes the Bible seriously. But now I have lost my job. My wife and I have no employment and no income. We've lost all of that work as the result of what can only be described as malicious lies, cruel and malicious claims.
Okay. So he's claiming that everything so far said about Agape and by extension, Rocco Leo is just malicious lies.
And he even knew who to blame.
Okay.
He said that it's all disgruntled former members of the church taking lies and suppositions and speculation from movies and the Mayan calendar. And you may remember the Mayan calendar conspiracy theory was the whole 2012 end of the world thing.
Absolutely.
Of course, we'd been told that Agape said that 2012 was going to be the end of the world. Microchipping, gassing,
Correct.
beheading. The only place to get any salvation was on the island in the South Pacific.
Absolutely.
Well, there was no island in the South Pacific, according to Raphael. He said, this whole thing is a misunderstanding. All comes about as a result of innocent comments made during Bible study classes.
That's a heck of a misunderstanding.
Well, the way Raphael explained it, people talked about all the media coverage around companies and governments using chips in phones and credit cards to identify people. I'm aware that some governments may do that. I know there's tracking devices, but I don't particularly care. Then he said, in the book of Revelations, it talks about the mark of the beast, and it's left for people to interpret that in their own way. But it's never been taught in the Agape church that people are going to be microchipped, and that's not a church doctrine.
Okay.
You can interpret the mark of the beast however you choose, Daniel.
Yes.
And if you choose to interpret that the mark of the beast might just be a microchip injected into your bloodstream that has a poison inside it that's going to result in you dying from cancerous boils, that's your interpretation.
But it's certainly not what's been taught in Bible studies.
Definitely not taught in Bible studies.
Okay. It doesn't say there that it hasn't possibly been suggested by one Rocco Leo either.
Now, Daniel, the interview with the Azariahs continued. Raphael also had some other issues.
Mm-hmm.
You'll remember allegations had been made about young girls being promised off to senior
Correct.
members. We talked a minute ago about the enforcer.
Absolutely.
The children involved in those allegations were Mr. Azariah's children.
Okay.
And he said flat out, that is not happening.
Okay.
They have not been promised in marriage to anyone. He said, Families SA came and interviewed us for an hour as a result of those allegations. We were embarrassed, we were upset, we were mortified. Nothing could be further from the truth. He also said that his daughters had never held a gun.
Okay.
We heard last episode that there were allegations that children as young as 12 were being trained to take over the island in Vanuatu in order to claim a holy land for Agape.
But this is the South Pacific island that doesn't exist.
The South Pacific island that doesn't exist, and the
Okay.
firing range and gun training that, according to Raphael Azariah, also doesn't exist. He said, neither of my daughters have ever held a gun.
Okay.
They wouldn't know how to. He said the fundamental tenor of the Agape Church is that Jesus died on the cross and was resurrected. We believe in love and we believe in forgiveness. And for that reason, he said, he forgave everybody that had been making these allegations, including his own mother, Leslie. He said, it's all a load of hogwash, and it was without a doubt some of the most cruel things we've ever heard said about us or anybody else.
Sean, we've got two very conflicting conversations going on here. We've got one talking about the fact that Agape certainly has a whole lot of underlying sort of foreboding about it. And we have a member of the Agape Ministries Church here saying that this is absolutely unfounded and malicious lies.
Now, what you need to know for context is this. A lot of what I've just recounted there is directly from my article. Wasn't prompted by questions from me.
Right.
Most of the questions I asked were met with a curt grunt and a shake of the head from one of the two heavies.
So they were directing traffic as in what could or couldn't be answered.
Very much so. The Azariahs were perfectly pleasant, really nice people to talk to, very clearly fundamentally believed everything they were saying. Raphael told me he'd been a member of Agape since 1993.
Right.
Which takes this even further back
Correct.
than our records. Sort of fills in that gap between Leo either starting Bible study in 1979 or running a brothel in 1980 through to this 1993 moment where Raphael joins the church, and he said changed his name from Barley God to Azariah, which means the Lord is my helper.
Right.
but I wasn't getting answers to my questions.
Right.
I was getting told what they were willing to tell me. The message, if you
Okay.
will, was being given to me. Delivered.
Okay, Sean. So the message is being delivered. This is a pretty big thing. This is kind of the first time we've heard anyone from the Agape Ministry speak out. Is that right?
That's right. First time their side of the story, as they would put it, is being told.
Okay, so how was that taken? What sort of response or reception do we get here?
The response was immediate and chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
24 hours later, the advertiser received an email from Rocco Leo himself.
Oh, okay.
Finally,
The Messiah speaks.
the Messiah speaks. He said that he was overseas for scheduled government international aid project talks.
Impressive title.
He'd been there when the raid happened, and he was going to stay there now that all this was going on.
Right.
Didn't disclose what country he was in, however. He said, look, I know that there were thousands of high-powered rifle rounds in the Agape properties,
Okay.
but I believed they were for shooting foxes at our country retreat.
20,000 foxes.
Well, they might be big foxes. They might need a couple of bullets each.
Maybe they're bad shots and they need multiple rounds.
Well, if you're letting 12-year-olds learn how to shoot, you've got to start somewhere.
Well, foxes aren't big.
But of course, none of this was Leo's fault.
Okay.
It was all the fault of 3 renegade church members.
Okay, so we've got renegade church members now.
Now, for obvious reasons, we're not going to name who he asserted were renegade
Okay,
church members,
sure.
but I think you can all figure it out if you've been listening this far.
Yes.
He said those disgruntled church members had spread these lies. They had been using undermining tactics with most congregation members, lying to them and instilling fear in them about some sinister doomsday cult with illegal activities. Meanwhile, to me, they would present an agreeable disposition, yet constantly be inciting congregation volunteers. Brother Rock was being white-handed, he said.
I was going to say, can you just put that in some context for us? So,
Sabotaged.
Right.
Sabotaged from within.
From within.
A Judas, if you will.
oh no.
A Judas within his own group. Because, of course, Agape says there's no Jesus. So therefore, this is his own personal Judas. Leo said he had no knowledge the ammunition had been hidden inside bed frames, but he did remember church members complaining about how heavy the bed frames were as they packed them into shipping containers.
Okay.
The shipping containers were, he said, for departure.
Okay.
Didn't say where, just departure.
Presumably for a South Pacific island that doesn't exist.
Or maybe for this international aid charity mission that he was on. A lot of foxes over there. He said this entire thing was a systematic attack on his charity, and it cuts to the very heart of the spirit of Australia. He said, I categorically state that at no time have I personally, or my associates, ever demanded any monies from any individual in return for any healing. That's been falsely reported. I hereby declare that I and Agape Ministries Incorporated have been witch hunted and framed by disgruntled church members in order to attempt to discredit our reputation, and I pray that justice will be served swiftly.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd use the term witch hunted in this state, and nor would I possibly use the term that would have been framed, because apparently you'd been bed framed.
You know what? One of Leo's prayers came true.
Oh,
Justice was served swiftly.
okay.
The South Australian Magistrates Court issued a warrant for his arrest almost immediately.
On what grounds? What was that issued for?
In our first episode of this series, we talked about an alleged assault that took place involving Leo. That had happened, funnily enough, at Adelaide Airport, as
Right.
Leo was leaving for this international aid mission that he purports to be on.
Okay.
A former member of Agape
Sure.
had tried to take a photo of him leaving. This man's wife and daughter were still in Agape.
So he was estranged from them.
Estranged from them,
Okay.
disfellowed,
Yes.
disenfranchised. The way that happens in all of these things. If you're not with us, you're against us, you're an enemy, you're a suppressive person, you're a whatever.
It sounds like he was very lucky not to be stoned to death because he questioned.
Exactly right. He got out with his, body intact.
Absolutely.
So he just tried to take a photograph of Leo as Leo was leaving the country.
Mhm.
At this point, the raid hadn't happened,
Sure.
but this guy had some inkling of perhaps of what was going to go on. Leo, he says, grabbed him by the camera strap, threw him to the ground and smashed the camera.
Okay.
That was the basis of the assault charge. So as a result, for the first time in all of this, we've got firearms, we've got allegations of tax fraud, we've got allegations of, demanding money from people, threatening them with death, lawsuits. It's an assault at an airport over a camera that finally leads to some form of criminal justice mechanism coming in on Brother Rock himself.
Well, this is why I asked just a moment ago, what was this actually, like, how do we finally get some sort of warrant for him? That's not what I'd anticipated it for.
It's almost an Al Capone thing, isn't it? You know, murder, racketeering, tax evasion.
Yeah.
This is tax evasion, massive lawsuits, guns,
Deception,
children kidnapping,
yeah.
deception, smashing a camera.
Yeah.
It's always the mundane thing that brings down the highfalutin.
Look, get them in any way you can, I suppose. So, okay, so we now have this arrest warrant issued.
And we also have Leslie Barleygood.
Okay.
Leslie had seen the interview that I'd conducted and she was very concerned. She said, look, my son looks very, very sick
Okay.
in the photographs that go with that interview. I don't know how far down he has to go before he hits rock bottom, but his life is clearly in tatters. As far as I know, he and all of the inner circle of Agape Ministries are still completely under the control of Rocco Leo. And of course, her son, you may remember, had forgiven her
Of course.
for what she'd said. She said, look, I don't need to be forgiven. I've done nothing wrong. I'm on Raphael's side. I love him, and I'm doing this for him.
That's going to be heartbreaking for it. Now, this is where we come into that piece around these are lives, these are families, these are human beings. This is a mother who's watching her son be, let's face it, brainwashed, if you like, or just fundamentally believing the concept of what Rocco is espousing and watching her family torn apart, losing contact with her grandchildren in that sense, and watching them be drawn into this just fantasy or type world that Rocco's creating.
Now that some reality had intruded in on this fantasy world in the form of charges,
Yeah.
things had to change. The charm offensive finally stopped.
Okay.
Things got serious. When the matter first came before the magistrate's court, Leo didn't turn up.
Mm.
Warrant's been issued now. Mr. Caldecott, where is your client? Well, Your Honour, I promise he will be here. 22nd of January 2011 is the next time that this matter is on. I promise you, Your Honour, my client will be here. He will answer the charges that are against him.
Okay.
22nd of January 2011 rolls around. You know, we're almost a year on now.
Yeah.
Coming up on the first anniversary of this raid.
Yep.
Judgment day for Rocco Leo. No sign of him.
Okay.
He did not appear in court. He did not answer his warrant.
So I can only imagine there was no judgment day and no Rocco Leo.
Indeed. And also, no more lawyers. At that point, Craig Caldecott and Co. decided they needed to step away from the file. They had given advice to their client.
Mm-hmm.
They had told the court he was going to show.
Yes.
And he hadn't.
Right.
In those circumstances, you can't continue to act
Okay.
for someone that just will not listen. And so Mr. Caldecott and his team stepped off the file.
Sure.
But that was very small comfort to anybody, especially Leslie Barleygood. She turned up to court that day hoping to see Leo, to say, where is my son?
Yeah.
Where are my grandchildren? Help me here. She said to me, look, as far as I understand, my son, his wife, and my grandchildren have now moved to Victoria. The whole rest of the group that was here in Adelaide are leaving this Saturday, and we understand they're going overseas. We believe Rocco Leo has finally found himself an island, or manipulated someone somewhere into allowing him what he wants.
We're now moving into a Jonestown piece where we're moving the whole flock to another country.
And this is the point where Agape, for all intents and purposes, goes underground. The charm offensive is over.
Right.
The only time from here on in that we hear about Agape Ministries is in the ongoing court processes that are about to get even more complicated.
Sean, fast forward 6 months to the 25th of June 2011. This was D-Day for Rocco Leo as he lounged by his pool early one quiet morning in a secluded former eco-resort in Fiji. Rocco and then-girlfriend Maria Antoinette Veneziano were arrested following a dramatic commando-style boat raid at this resort. At the time, authorities believed Leo and his girlfriend had been living there for more than a year, until the police and 4 Fiji Immigration Service officers arrived by boat at 7 a.m. They didn't expect us to come, said Detective Tommaso Kororu, who led the raid on the compound. We went in by boat, and he was just relaxing at his pool, wearing a black t-shirt and brown shorts.
Very un-Messiah-like.
It's the fashion this season for all messiahs, Sean. Detective Carrora said apart from Leo and Veneziano, there were 6 other people in the compound at that time. He said that Leo appeared resigned to his fate when he saw this. He didn't say anything, we just gave him the warrant for his arrest, and he admitted he was on the run. Those people who were there said that he was our Jesus. So I told them, today you're going to see our Jesus, said Detective Carrora.
What a moment. Commando-style boat raid, quippy one-liners. It's got all the Hollywood panache, doesn't it?
Either that or a really cheesy sitcom based in the South Pacific somewhere of I don't know, or off the coast of Miami in some 80s sort of drug running.
Bit of Thunder in Paradise, perhaps.
That kind of deal, absolutely, something of that Miami Vice style.
Well, look, finally Rocco Leo had been arrested.
Yeah,
But Daniel, he hadn't been arrested for any of the things we've talked about.
he seems to slip through the most obvious. What was he arrested for this time?
Before I tell you that, I've got to tell you this. What emerged in the wake of that daring boat raid was that South Australian Police had visited the Adelaide Magistrates Court just a few days earlier in a closed court hearing, and they had sought and been granted a warrant to arrest Leo on 126 counts of fraud.
Okay, 126 counts of fraud.
They said that this was 117 counts of deceiving another to benefit himself and 9 counts of aggravated deceiving another to benefit himself between March 2006 and October 2008, involving $200,000 taken from cult members for a specific purpose, namely the establishment of a church in Fiji, but had been allegedly diverted for Leo's personal use.
Well, then that's it. We can wrap this up. Thank you, everyone, for listening. A wonderful 126 charges.
Well, just hold the phone there for a moment.
What do you mean?
Well, you see, that's not the way things roll here on Just Lawful.
Okay.
Because the thing you need to know, Daniel, is that Australia has no extradition treaty with Fiji.
So we've now got these charges against him.
Plus the assault charge.
Which is also outstanding. Yet he's sitting somewhere where we can't touch him. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
That's right. So the boat raid kind of had nothing to do with those fraud charges.
So what was the boat raid about? Why was he arrested at that point in Fiji?
Well, SAPOL had announced to the Fijian authorities, there's a fugitive over there. We'd like to get him. Could you perhaps possibly take some time to look into this for us? We know we have no extradition treaty, but would you do us a solid?
Okay.
Fiji looked at the records and went, they've overstayed their visa. We'll arrest them for that.
Sorry, so this is merely you've been a tourist in our country too long.
That's all it is. Which is why Rocco Leo was allowed to stay under house arrest in his former eco-resort with his yacht nearby and wait until the Fijian authorities decided if they were going to charge him over overstaying his visa, while the South Australian Police tried to figure out how they were actually going to deliver a measure of justice in a country that had no interest in helping.
How on earth can you consider that house arrest? If that's house arrest, Sean, please arrest me at that sort of house. I would happily serve out house arrest under those circumstances.
I think a lot of people would, and for Leo, it was the perfect position. He's getting to enjoy all the riches that are around him.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a unswanky place, you know what I mean? This is a good place to stay.
It was a former resort, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So he's staying there, enjoying the lap of luxury, while meanwhile, back in South Australia, the South Australian Police and the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Polaris QC, have quite the headache to try to deal with.
So as you said, you could almost consider that he was in no man's land, but in this case, he's in this man of God's land.
Good way of putting it.
Yeah, he had the best of both worlds, as you said. He couldn't be extradited, yet he was on house arrest in a resort in Fiji.
Meanwhile, back in the ranch, South Australia Police and the DPP weren't having the best of communications.
How so?
Well, on the 13th of July 2011, we discovered that the police and the DPP were at odds on whether or not they were even sharing the evidence to test the legal grounds to extradite Rocco Leo from Fiji.
Hang on, just explain that to me again. So we've got the DPP and South Australian Police.
When the police charge somebody, it's on them to provide to the DPP what's called a brief of evidence.
Okay.
These are the charges.
Yep.
This is the evidence that we say supports those charges.
Sure.
This case should be prosecuted.
Okay.
According to Mr. Polaris, he hadn't been given a brief of police evidence. He'd not even been consulted as to whether any extradition could be attempted. He knew nothing about the 126 fraud charges.
Okay, that seems astounding.
Well, the police were astounded too because they said they had provided a full brief of evidence to the DPP, plus a request for confirmation that he would prosecute Leo if Leo could be returned from Fiji.
So hang on, so we've got two very contrasting stories here.
Well, as far as Mr. Polaris was concerned, there was absolutely no debate. In this case, we have not received any brief of evidence supporting the fraud charges, he said. And he said, authorities will not seek Leo's extradition against the evidence against him is likely to secure a conviction, and I will only advise on the prospects of a conviction when I have all the police evidence. So the procedure to be followed now is that SA Police need to deliver what evidence they have to me. If the prospects of obtaining a conviction are reasonable, I'll advise police and will be able to give an undertaking to the Commonwealth Attorney General that if Rocco Leo is returned to South Australia, we will prosecute him.
So the DPP is saying, I haven't been given the evidence, so therefore I can't make an adjudication on this. Once I get the evidence, I'll then consider whether we believe we can get a conviction from that, but until then, no go.
I won't even contemplate thinking about thinking until you give me something to contemplate.
Okay.
Well, that was the situation for less than 24 hours.
Okay.
Because the very next day, 14th of July, Mr. Polaris said he'd been delivered a 200-page brief from police.
So if he hadn't before, the SA Police were making sure he certainly has now.
Think about the amount of work that goes into a 200-page brief of evidence.
Absolutely.
This is the creme de la creme of SAPOL investigation, pulling together everything that we've talked about till now. Tax office records, lawsuits, assault charges, fraud charges, what happened to Sylvia Melchiori, what happened to Martin Penny, what happened to the Bali gods, all pulled together into one surefire document that says, we can prove this.
And I'm going to say, and I'm going to be a little obtuse here, that's more than the 24 hours worth of work right there.
That's right. This had clearly been worked on for a very long time, possibly even since the very first moment of the raid.
So, 200-page brief delivered to the DPP. Okay, so extradition done, brought him back, charged. Where do we go from here?
We go to the 27th of July 2011 when the DPP declines to prosecute Leo. No, you heard me right. The DPP declines to prosecute fugitive cultist Rocco Leo.
Okay, presumably there's an explanation.
Look, 35,000 rounds of ammunition were found in total. Remember it was 20,000?
Yep.
It's now at 35,000.
Almost double.
Guns have been stockpiled, according to this.
Not just a few firearms offences, we've now got stockpiled weapons.
It's gone up, it's gone up, it's gone up. 126 counts of fraud, detonators, all of that stuff, and the DPP says no.
So again, I'm still waiting for this explanation.
There wasn't one. The DPP simply said, I will not prosecute.
How is that? Look, and I understand the DPP has to make a determination on the evidence provided, whether he believes there's a solid chance of probability of conviction. I understand that. Where is there no probability here of conviction?
Well, that was the exact question that Senator Nick Xenophon, who you may remember had been trying to bust the cult for a time, had and posed. He said, there ought to be an independent review of this decision by the Solicitor General or someone of his neutrality because the DPP is not infallible. I think Mr. Leo would be having a big laugh under his coconut tree after hearing of this decision. Now, that brought Mr. Polaris out with a response. He said, our departmental handling of the matter has been timely and professional, and anybody that's criticising us clearly has, quote, very little understanding of the strength of the evidence in this case, unquote.
Okay. See, here's an interesting point. I'm going to be probably a little sort of aside from where you might expect my stance to be. I completely understand that if the weight of that evidence doesn't provide that, or a probability, that DPP has made the correct decision. My only concern with that is, without knowing what the weight of that is, as he said, anyone who says that doesn't have a good understanding of that. Great. Provide me said good understanding. Because at this stage, I understand your point of view to say, no, we won't and can't if it's not good. You haven't told me whether it's good or not. You've just said no.
Well, Mr. Polaris spoke a little more over the days that followed because, as
Okay.
you can imagine, a lot of people felt the way you did.
Sure.
A lot of people felt the way Nick Xenophon did, and he felt he needed to make some explanation. He said, "We've not been asked to review anything but the 200-page brief. If police come up with more evidence, we'll look at it and we'll give advice. We haven't been asked to look at firearms offences. We haven't been given any material relating to that. All the material we've got since the beginning of May related to one allegation of fraud. And I'm very confident there is nothing else in the office that related to Mr. Leo on any other charges."
So we have no firearms charges, no detonators, no batons, none of that, no stockpiling of weapons or bullets. One single statement of, I can't believe. Sean, what happened to the assault charge?
Well, that's a really good question. That's still on foot. The DPP had made the decision about that earlier.
Right.
That's separate to this.
But we can't use that as the extradition for this.
Apparently not.
Okay.
Because Mr. Polaris said, look, once we had the 200 pages of evidence, we needed to speak to the principal witness that police say supported the case. And we did that. The sum total of that conversation was that this case was not a goer.
Sean, the term a no-go. We are not going to proceed with any criminal charges at this time against Rocco Leo. Is that what you're telling me from all the documentation that finally got to the DPP, but the determination is no?
I'm not just telling you it was a no then. I'm telling you it was a no forever. Because, spoiler alert, that is the end of any attempt to pursue Rocco Leo through the criminal courts.
So hang on. So this man has essentially, well, he's had these charges potentially raised against him, and they've just been let go, gone.
That's right.
It.
The fraud charges vanish into the ether. They did not exist. They will not exist. They will not appear. The only thing outstanding on Rocco Leo to this day is that assault charge.
So Sean, forever. So is there any chance ever of being able to reinstate these charges?
When someone chooses not to pursue a case and a charge is withdrawn, or in this case, not filed in the first place, you can absolutely remount it down the track.
Okay.
So it still sits there. It still could be used. But think about what Mr. Polaris said.
Right.
We spoke to the witness upon whom all this hinged, and we were not satisfied that there was enough there to make this a goer.
So, based on the evidence given and the witness there,
who we don't know who that is, by the way.
No, that's okay. But whatever that conversation was, and that investigation was, and the interview process was, there is never, the likelihood is we are never going to find that these charges will ever be brought up, and therefore Rocco's never going to have to be held accountable to this. Is that what you're telling me?
That's what I'm telling you. Unless something else came up, unless something was thrown up by a civil lawsuit, a new witness came forward, someone was prepared to talk more about what went on inside that property at Oakton, what went on behind those closed gates.
Sure.
Someone was prepared to sit and give evidence and truly testify. You're not going to see anything else filed against Rocco Leo.
So you're essentially telling me I can go in one hand and wish in the other and see which one fills up first?
Pretty much so, yeah. And you can do it on a beach in Fiji.
Unbelievable. So if that's the case, if we've got that situation where there's no criminal charges, then what is left?
The only possible remedy that any of the people involved now have is through the civil courts, doing exactly what Sylvia Melchiori and Martin Penny are doing at this point, suing to get their money back. But it's only money.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Sean. You know, we started this project and called it Just Lawful. So I'm going to go back a half a step, and we know that the DPP has said there's no probability of getting a conviction on those charges. So
they have a phrase for it: no reasonable prospect of conviction.
Okay. Essentially, he then has made the determination that, from a lawful perspective, we're not going to get a conviction here. That is so far from what anyone who's been involved in that would consider just, surely.
Absolutely. And to put it in the broader context of this project, we started this entire show with Julie Kelvin.
Yeah.
She had a trial over the death of her son that had an outcome that she disagreed with and disagrees with to this day.
Absolutely.
But she had a trial.
Yeah.
We moved on to Steve Egberts, who had both of his grandchildren murdered horribly.
Yeah.
He went through a living hell in terms of the court process.
Yep.
But it was a court process.
Yeah.
Anyone involved in the Agape story to this point, Leslie Barlygod, Trevor, John, Julie, Martin Penny,
Yeah.
Sylvia Melchiori,
Yeah.
there will be no trial. There is no moment where Rocco Leo gets marched into a dock and is asked guilty or not guilty. There is no moment where a jury of 12 people listen to everything we've just laid out and decided whether or not it counts as fraud. There is no moment where there is any accounting for the firearms, for the bullets, for the detonators, for the detonator cords as relating to Rocco Leo, Marie Veneziano, or Joe Veneziano.
But beyond that, what about the concept of potential child brides, potentially defrauding people of their money, lying to them for the deception of personal gain? All of that, nothing.
What about the fracturing of the Barlygod family?
Yeah.
Leslie Barlygod at this point has no idea where her son is. She has no idea where her daughter-in-law is. She has no idea where her grandchildren are. The last she knew, they were being promised in marriage to the enforcer. Now, her son denied that.
Yep.
But how much is his denial worth to her peace of mind, given
Absolutely.
everything else that's going on?
Sean, that is really interesting. When you talk about peace of mind, we're talking about families being torn apart, fractured, as you said. I want to ask you, and I know you see it in a number of different cases in what you've dealt with. Have you been sort of, exposed and had this experience of this cult-like situation, or this, family being fractured under these sorts of circumstances before?
I've certainly seen families fractured under religious sects before.
Okay.
I covered a case a few years ago where a man who was of the Jehovah's Witness denomination was accused of poisoning one of the elders, injecting weed killer into their food and drink.
Right.
He was upset that he'd been disfellowed
Okay.
by the elders. So that's a process wherein you're found to have committed a transgression against the faith.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to turn up to all the services, but no one's allowed to speak to you. No one's allowed to talk to you. You're
Yeah.
effectively an unperson.
Yeah, right.
And this situation had caused him great emotional distress. He'd asked multiple times to be let back into the faith,
Yeah.
been refused multiple times, and so turned to this poisoning campaign to basically make them sick enough and scared enough and frightened enough that they'd let him back into what they considered to be decent society.
Yeah,
It can drive people to massive extremes.
Absolutely. Because this is that, as much as we want to talk about the criminal charges, we want to talk about the, the civil charges of being able to get money back. This is fracturing, families. This is actually destroying relationships and that family unit piece. This is not something that, and look, I know that, unfortunately, this is the heart of how cults manipulate. Right? This is exactly what they do. They will absolutely prey on that. They will make you be disconnected from those who love, as I think we mentioned earlier. It's one of the core tenets of how the textbook aspects of how cults propagate. They will get there, and usually, unfortunately, they will prey on those that are maybe vulnerable, maybe disconnected, whatever that might be, to get them in. But they will then systematically break that connection to the outside world and the former loved ones. That is so soul-crushing and destroying, and it just breaks those people who are on the outside looking in, wondering, where did my family go? What happened there? So, and I can only imagine that that's exactly what Leslie felt through this whole process.
Yeah, well, Leslie actually drops out of the narrative at this point,
Okay.
with no chance of charges being filed, with no sign of her son, her daughter-in-law, or her grandchildren. She had no choice but to try to move on with her life as best she could, and as I say, she drops out of the narrative here, and I can only hope that wherever she is now, she's doing as well as possible.
Okay. Well, we've talked about Leslie, we've talked about the Trevors, and we've talked about Melchioris, and all of these names you rattled off. There are so many affected people in this process. There's nothing left in that criminal sort of mechanism of the justice system for them.
There is no justice coming from the justice system for them.
Where is Rocco Leo in all of this, Sean?
At this point in time, Rocco Leo is sitting on a beach in Fiji with his yacht, with his girlfriend, with his money, with several lawsuits pending against him. And at this point, Rocco Leo has decided, now that I'm not going anywhere, now that I have to stay right here while they decide whether or not I've committed a visa misdemeanor,
Right.
he decides he's going to fight those lawsuits. He's going to hire lawyers, some of whom will go on to become justices of the Supreme Court to fight his battles for him. He's going to take on Martin Penny and try to stop him from claiming that money. He's going to take on Silvia Melchiori and stop her from trying to reclaim the funds that she gave to Agape. Most importantly, he's going to take on the Australian Taxation Office because he says he should never have been stripped of his tax exemption in the first place. He is, after all, the man of God, a walking charitable case. He is Agape itself. So if anybody deserves a tax break, it's the living personification of Agape.
Sean, why would he need to have got such high-profile, high-powered legal representation?
Well, while all of this international intrigue has been going on,
Yeah.
yours truly has been busy.
Okay.
The Sean that was back at this point has been digging through records, reading court files, pulling up pieces of transcript, as have my fellow journalists. And together, as a team, we've worked out the exact size of the Agape Empire and why Rocco Leo is going to fight so desperately for it.
Okay.
Because as of that point in time,
Yeah.
the Agape Empire spanned 2 cities, 8 properties, 13 vehicles, millions of dollars across 10 separate bank accounts, and an unpaid tax debt of $3 million.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode as we've got to the really juicy part, the dollars. Where is the money? How do we get the money? What's going on? We will pick that up in our next episode as we continue the Agape Ministries international series that we're doing. Sean, when we get there on the next episode, what can we expect?
We are, as you say, going to follow the money. We're going to follow it through several different jurisdictions of the court. We're going to see whether the court can survive being smited by the hand of God itself.
Oh boy.
And I'm going to teach you all about a little game. A game called Tombola.
Tombola, can't wait. Smiting of the courts from God, Tombola, following the money, next episode. Until then, we want to thank everyone for coming with us on this journey. Whether you've heard the broadcast on 5AA or whether you catch our podcast on the iTunes and Spotify platforms, please, we'd love for you to go on there, rate, review, leave us some feedback on those platforms. Get our message out to, as we call it, the podosphere would be wonderful. If you want to give us some direct feedback, please, you can do that at Just Lawful on both Facebook and Instagram, or at Just Lawful Pod on Twitter. You can, of course, follow Sean, the True Crime of Adelaide, and his work with the Advertiser newspaper, at Sean Fuster on Facebook and Twitter. Don't forget, in a couple of episodes' time, we have Ask Sean Anything. So please, justlawfulpodcast@gmail.com. Sean, apparently, do you like honey on your crumpets is one thing we need to understand. What is do you put left shoe, right shoe first? How do you put them on? What's your favourite pair of socks? There's some really interesting stuff coming through.
Favourite pair of socks? You probably put that one through, I'm assuming.
I might have.
You're the sock fiend.
I am the sock fiend, indeed. Until then, we look forward to talking to you. Please remember, as we always say, enjoy our work, don't become our work, and we will speak to you next time on the next episode of Just Lawful.